Hello everyone, today's guest is Riley Jackson from IV Farm Technologies, a UK-based company at the vanguard of the cultivated meat revolution. Riley and her team are working to grow real meat from animal cells without the need for factory farming and slaughter, potentially solving some of the biggest challenges facing our food system. IV Farm is developing innovative bioreactor technologies to scale production and make cultivated meat commercially viable. We'll explore, among other things, how this technology works, the timeline for when cultivated meat might reach our plates, their biggest scaling challenges, and how it could transform food production. This was recorded on May 7th. Please welcome Riley Jackson. So why don't you start by telling us about what the problem with meat, or perhaps I should say meat production, is?
Absolutely. Well, I'll give a little intro before we begin. I'm Riley Jackson. I'm head of brand and marketing at IV Farm Technologies. I've been here about a year and a half now, and I come from the alternative protein space in the US. So worked for brands like the Good Food Institute and Impossible Foods and all those. So more plant-based, and now I'm in a more technical role, which is really exciting. So why cultivated meat? Gosh, there's a lot of different reasons to get into this space. I think the number one reason where we have the highest impact is, of course, global warming, right? We're looking for all sorts of ways to combat global warming, and the second largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions is animal agriculture, and specifically meat. So we need some solutions, and there's a lot of people doing a very diverse set of potential solutions, from mycelium, which is mushroom, all the way to precision fermentation for dairy, and then cultivated meat for creating real meat differently. So we're going to need more earth or solutions, because right now we're using our natural resources at a pace that's just not sustainable. We're killing about 79 billion animals a year, and those animals take up about 80% of the arable land in the world and only produce about 18% of our global calories. So you're looking at a pretty horrendous input to output ratio. And I know you talk a lot about innovations, you're not going to see that in very many industries in the world. It's just really not efficient. So when IV Farm was created, it was basically one of our co-founders looking at the global retail food industry, so grocery stores, and saying, wow, we really need a solution. They're not going to be able to reach net zero and still sell meat at the pace they're selling at. If we're going to feed 10 billion people, we're going to need a lot more on the grocery shelf than just traditionally farmed meat. So thus IV Farm spun out of Oxford University, and now we're about 50 strong, still in Oxford proper, and finding some solutions to those major issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. There are so many issues, from, the animals, so many of them being killed per year and the conditions they live in, to rainforest deforestation, to emissions and water usage and waste. So it's good that cultivated meat addresses pretty much all of them.
Well, also, I think if you think about antibiotic resistance, I read the other day that the World Health Organization thinks that by 2050, antibiotic resistance will kill more people than cancer, which completely blew my mind. But if you think about it, about 3/4 of emerging diseases are zoonotic, meaning coming from animals. So, yeah, definitely kill a bunch of birds with one stone, if you will.
For sure. So let's talk about trends now. Isn't it the case that people are eating less and less meat?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the country you're looking at, right? So here in the UK, I think over the last 10 years, our demand for meat has dropped about 17%, whereas in the US, it's pretty steady, if not increasing a bit. With developing countries, you're going to see a lot more demand as people reach middle class. A lot of the signals of that wealth status are consuming more meat. In countries like the UK, where we're seeing that decline, it's largely due to awareness around environmental and health benefits of switching to a more flexible diet. So you're seeing a lot of people kind of reach into that flexitarian demographic. Pretty self-explanatory title there, but they're looking for a little bit more moderation and diversity in the food they're eating. We could dive into like healthy gut and eating for heart disease and all that stuff, but I think trends are just pointing them more towards how do I spend a little bit less money and stay healthy. So I think that's where those trends are coming from. And then in the US, I think there's all sorts of reasons why it could be remaining strong. We did see a dip during COVID, and I think that was just due to raised awareness and the potential downsides of factory farming. So, yeah, so for us as a company, we can make product mixed with traditionally farmed meat, we can make it with plant based, we can make it with mushroom, we can make it with all sorts of things. So, demand for protein is really what we look for. So, everything everybody just kind of needs food. So we're able to be a pretty diverse application to a lot of different consumer demands in different countries, which is music to investors' ears, thankfully.
Hmm. I think there has at least been a shift towards people wanting to eat more healthily, as you said. And that also is good here because with the cultivated meat, you eliminate the chance of things like salmonella or E. coli. And also, you don't use antibiotics, like you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's really incredible when you look at the process of, not to get too graphic, but the slaughter process, basically what happens when you expose meat to like the stomach of an animal and how many bacterial colonies are involved in that. Obviously,
Gross.
we don't grow anything to do with the stomach, and if any level of contamination gets into our process, the cells won't grow. So it's pretty airtight. I'm a little bit of a germaphobe, so it makes me feel pretty good that this is a progression in the supply chain. But yeah, we
Hmm.
could talk about that all day, but we won't.
Besides that, how do cultivated meat products compare nutritionally to conventional meat? Are there areas where they might be superior?
Yeah, so cultivated meat is meat. It's just made differently. So we grow it instead of raising it. So when we do our testing, nutritional testing and all of that, we see very comparable nutritionals. So the amino acids are there, the iron is there, the protein is there, the fat is there, because it is genetically meat. The interesting thing that you just touched on is eventually we'll be able to innovate new nutritional profiles, like bespoke nutritionals. So, for example, our cell lines right now have omega 3s and omega 6s in Wagyu beef, and that's not typical, which is great because those things are pretty hard to get in a diet, especially if you don't eat traditional meat. But really, for everyone, it's pretty hard to get, and B12 is quite high as well. So we'll be able to feed our cells, and we're so close with the process of growing them that we'll know exactly what they need to eat in order to produce specific nutritionals, right? Just like an animal. You grass feed, grass finish, you know the difference versus corn finish or corn fed. So we'll be able to do something quite similar with our product in theory.
Hmm. So, where are we in terms of approvals and going to market, the space as a whole, and then also Ivy Farm specifically?
Yeah, gosh, the hot topic. So we as an industry are making great strides in this. A company called Vow out of Australia is selling in a handful of restaurants, which doesn't seem like much, but if you look at the past 10 years, that's a huge feat. And they're making really interesting products. I saw a quail martini in Singapore, I thought was crazy, but really creative. It just shows the versatility of cultivated meat. But they're selling in I believe they just got approval in Australia. They're in Singapore, Hong Kong. There's three companies that are approved in the US. Mission Barnes is the most recent, and they're doing cultivated pork fat. And they're selling at Sprouts Grocery and Fioriella, I believe is how you pronounce it, a Italian restaurant right downtown San Francisco. So we're actually seeing it pop up, and you can Google it and get it delivered to your house in Singapore and a food delivery app. So that's incredible. As a nerd from this space, it's been since really 2013 that we've been waiting for this. So it is on shelves. It's very hard to find, but it's there.
Hmm.
So I'm counting it.
Yeah,
Um,
certain cities, it seems like San Francisco, and
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's going to be cities where food innovation is really supported. So San Francisco, Singapore, those are really, really innovation familiar supportive environments. So you're going to
Yeah.
see things like this get approved. Like you can take in San Francisco a self-driving car to a restaurant that sells cultivated pork fat.
It's the
Very
future.
futuristic. Yeah. So that's kind of the global perspective, I believe. Aleph is approved in Israel, Mission Barnes in the US, Good Meat and Upside also in the US, Vow in Australia, and more to come, right? There's a lot of us fighting the good fight, so very exciting. Ivy Farm specifically, we are in the midst of our approval process, so we're applying all over the world again to markets that are going to be viable for Wagyu beef, right? That there's nobody out there that's doing beef besides Aleph that's anywhere close, I don't believe, to regulatory approval. So really exciting. And our focus is, of course, going to be US, UK, and Singapore, pending others as well. But we're hoping to be in the approval category in 2026. So working really hard towards that goal right now.
Awesome. I look forward to buying a burger or something from Ivy Farm.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
So some countries, like Italy at least, have banned cultivated meat. I'm not sure if they're the only one, but that's one country that I read about recently. So I didn't really understand that. Do you have any idea why someone would want to ban this? Maybe it stems from not being particularly informed about it and all of its benefits.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm of two minds on this. Personally, of course, I don't want anyone to ban any food anywhere unless it's deemed unhealthy, right? So I'm not wildly concerned about bans for food just because I think as soon as they figure out what it is and actually how incredible it is and how helpful it is to so many different goals, I think they'll overturn that. I'm really confident that when people learn about what we're doing and what it actually is and remove a little bit of that ultra processed hysteria, I think the welcome will be quite warm. For example, in the US, there's a few states that have flirted with the idea of banning and even put in some legislation, but there was recently a cattle rancher, I believe, who came out and said, hey, it's really unconstitutional to ban things. Like, we shouldn't start doing that because, as we know, law is heavily dependent on precedent, and I think once you start dabbling in this is what you can and can't eat, it's a quite slippery slope. I don't pretend, especially in this day and age, to know much about politics, because every time I think I do, it turns around. But I think with things like that, honestly, I love to see the passion and the commitment to a healthy food system, because one, I know that we'll be able to contribute to it as soon as there's a little bit more education, and two, it's really important for everybody to be involved in the food system, in what we eat, where it comes from, how it's made. So when I see that passion and I see the stuff in the news, it's such a green light because we want people to ask these questions and to start getting curious because the food system needs changing, right? It doesn't need a complete overhaul overnight, but we need to be open to solutions to a system that's not going to work to feed 10 billion people in the next decade. So if Italy wants to get really down in the details of what is our protein supply going to look like in the next 15 years, we're here, we're available. I know that they're probably going to have some glorious startup, make some beautiful Italian meats, but I'm less threatened and more inquisitive about that, to be honest.
Yeah. I guess maybe it's partly to protect, farmers and the people that raise normal
Yeah.
animals.
Yeah, which I think also is interesting because, for us, for example, we work with a lot of farmers who are telling us, hey, we're not able to make money. The weather is changing. The growing season is shorter. Our subsidies are shrinking. We can't make money. And we don't want to make our herd size bigger because we don't have enough land and we can't afford it. And it's bad for the environment for us to just completely fill the pastures, right? Even the local environment, they're finding backlash and really stripping the land. So they're actually looking for solutions, and we partner with a couple farming communities here in the UK who want solutions. So it's really collaborative, which is nice.
Yeah. Now for some science and technical questions.
Woohoo.
So there are two main hurdles right now with cultivated meat: the cost and the scaling, which are related but not identical.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of the growth media, which is the biggest component of production cost, I believe. The growth media cost per kilogram of cultivated meat has dropped from approximately $10,000 to around $100 in recent years. What specific biotechnical innovations or other kinds of innovations drove this cost reduction, and what's your projection for the next order of magnitude improvement?
Yeah, that's a great call out. The media is really a fascinating topic, and I think for those who, again, who are new, which is most of us, to cultivated meat, the media is basically our food source for the cells. So we feed them this intricate constellation of nutrients that makes them happy and healthy and grow fast and strong. Um, the major things that contribute to us bringing the cost down are, of course, what are we growing the cells in? So bespoke bioreactors. What are we feeding the cells? So the media. How much are we harvesting, and when are we harvesting, and then where we're making the cells? So like where in the world production wise. So I think in terms of the media, we have been able to really tweak that recipe and really do a lot of time intensive, worthwhile, but time intensive experimentation on exactly which combinations make our cells thrive. We have partnerships all over the world to help us create these bespoke recipes. And we've really been able to get a strong, lean recipe where we have just enough that the cells are thriving, but not too much as to overwhelm or cost us a lot of money. So, greatly simplified, obviously. I know our head of media is going to hear this and be like, there's a little bit more to it. But for people who are just getting into this, that's pretty much what you need to know. But yeah, I mean, you could have 8 podcasts on how interesting the media is. And it's just like, I mean, if you think about farming, like what you feed the cows, it's life, right? It's everything. So pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. When do you predict it'll be as cheap as conventional meat, given all of these costs?
Yeah, gosh, price is a huge one. So I think when you look at any food innovation, it's got to taste great, it's got to be affordable, and it's got to be convenient, right? So right now, taste is pretty good. We're making Wagyu beef. It doesn't get much better than that. Price, of course, we're working to get that down every day. And then convenience, it should cook similar to traditional beef when we're in mixed product. So the price is going to be something that we need to have competitive before we launch. So I think as we scale and race towards regulatory approval, we hope to come to market at obviously a premium at first, but the goal is to be cost parity with the beef that's on the shelf so that people can really have a reasonable choice to make a switch, not a compromise. So hopefully, no later than 2027, we'll be competitive with what's on the shelf. And then in 2026, you'll likely see some really interesting menu items at some high end restaurants. None of this is confirmed, of course, my own speculation, but I think our consumer demographic right now and our volume capability is pointing us towards smaller, more tailored experiences where we get to get a lot of feedback, and that price point is a little bit higher, so we have a bit of wiggle room when we're selling.
What's your assessment of the theoretical minimum production cost for cultivated meat?
Yeah, well, so I'm not in manufacturing, of course, so this is definitely speculation on my side, but it's a pretty complex question because there's so many different variables to control, right? Like I said earlier, you have the type of cell line, you have what you're feeding it, you have your style of bioreactor, your rate of harvest. Are you doing batch? Are you doing continuous? And then downstream processing, right? Like after harvest, how are you putting it into packaging? What are you mixing it with? All that stuff. So as we get closer and closer and closer to market availability, honestly, things change a lot because we're constantly discovering new ways of working, right? Something gets unlocked that shows a new pathway that wasn't available before. So I won't put a specific number on it, but I will tell you that, again, our goal is to be quite affordable and able to supplement factory farming, let's say, because again, that's really what's draining the environment so aggressively. So we're aiming to be quite low. That's the goal right now, but I won't commit to anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough because there are a lot of different factors that go into a calculation like that. But yeah, it's amazing given that the first ever lab grown burger cost I think like $330,000 to create in
Yeah,
2013ish.
Mosa
Yeah.
meat, the burger,
Yeah.
crazy.
Could you explain a bit more how the bioreactor works?
Yeah, in what sense? Like just basically what it does?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So a bioreactor, in a sense, is very similar to a fermentation tank that makes kombucha or beer, something like that. So when you look at it, that's what you think it was. Very familiar. But basically, what we do is we get our beautiful, gorgeous cells, our Wagyu beef, and we put them into this vessel and we make sure that they're happy, right? Like kind of a cow in a pasture. It has to be an okay temperature, it's got to be exposed to sunlight and air, and it's got to have all the food that it wants and not be too crowded, right? So basically, the challenges of the bioreactor are how do you get the food in and out? How do you get the waste out without hurting the cells? How do you spin them just fast enough or stir them just fast enough that they're exposed to oxygen, but not too fast as to increase the shear to a point where they might rupture? So then you have to consider how you're going to harvest, right? How you're going to be gentle enough to get the product out and be able to siphon off some of the liquid that they're in there with. So it's actually a pretty familiar process in the grand scheme of food, but of course, in the grand scheme of meat, it's a completely novel one. So we have a whole host of absolute MacGyver genius engineers that go down there and basically invent technology. So it's really incredible, and they're the best in the world at what they do. So you wouldn't believe the kind of innovation that comes out of it.
For scaling bioreactors beyond 10,000 liters, what do you think becomes the limiting engineering challenge? Is it something like oxygen transfer or waste removal or something else?
Yeah, I think it's so interconnected that it's kind of yes and to everything. It's the same issue as at 1 liter, at 5 liter, 50, 600, 1,000, 10,000. It's all about food in, food out, waste management, how quickly you're stirring, and then how to harvest at every level. And then also, you get to a point where you have to think about actually creating the bioreactor, so sourcing steel or
Mm.
upcycling from other industries. We have a partner in Finland who's upcycling from dairy. They have dairy tanks and they want to turn them into bioreactors. So very scrappy, very bootstrapped, which is incredible, and mission aligned for us to kind of have as low impact as possible. But those are the only major thing as you get that size that changes is sourcing the steel.
Are there other obstacles or bottlenecks to producing this at scale and introducing it to society, or is it mainly just the bioreactors?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think, of course, scalable media, scalable bioreactors. Consumer acceptance is a big one, of course. We can touch on that whenever you want. But I think we one thing that's such a green flag in this process is because there's so little contamination and the food safety will be so high in theory, we won't have very much wastage, which for those of you who are into the food system, you know that about a third of the food we eat in the supply chain is wasted, which is crazy and really bad for greenhouse gas emissions. And, of
Yeah.
course, global hunger, right? That's not a great number. So, for us, being able to produce a product that in theory has a really long shelf life because it's quite stable and doesn't have many contaminants, that's really exciting. So I think honestly one of the major challenges is going to be educating people and figuring out how to talk about all these incredible benefits in such a way that people are open to it. Because right now it's really hard to ask people about a product they've never seen or tasted, right? Like it's basically saying, what do you think about being in space? But you can't go up there and we're not going to show you any pictures. So it's just hard. Like people like to speculate, but it's hard to get concrete consumer information. So that's been a really fun challenge to kind of look at other industries that have innovated. So like the pivot from a horse to cars and how people freaked out, or river ice to artificial ice, gas to electric,
Yeah.
plant milk, GMO, organic, like all these disruptive food changes or industry changes that became progressions, evolutions, adaptations to support a larger population and a more efficient lifestyle. Um, I think that's been really fun, and that will be one of the major hurdles for us, or opportunities to learn as I'm rebranding it in my head. But yeah, I think that'll be, aside from obviously the logistics and the process, that'll be a really big one as well.
Hmm. Do you expect cellular agriculture innovations to extend beyond meat to other products soon, like dairy, eggs, or even novel foods?
Yeah, gosh, there's so many interesting companies right now that are playing with this. So you have companies that are making coffee and chocolate. I don't know if anybody follows those industries, but they're going to get way more expensive over the next decade. And I personally am panicking because those are two staples in my diet, coffee and
Really? Yeah,
chocolate.
I think
So,
I heard something about chocolate getting more expensive soon. I'm not sure why, but
yeah, well, it's just climate change, and the environment it's grown in is very susceptible. So if that's not a motivator to support this industry, I truly don't know what is. Um, but that's really exciting. And then you'll see a lot of precision fermentation, which is kind of a tangential industry. They do mostly dairy, and that's really exciting as well. Very innovative, and there's companies like Better Dairy here in the UK, and then Perfect Day in the US doing dairy, and then Every Company down in San Francisco doing really intriguing stuff with egg protein. So the wonderful thing about this space, let's call it high tech food or biofoods, um, is that people are incredibly passionate about really specific things. So not only do they make great dinner guests, but also they will really put it all on the line to make sustainable change, which is exhilarating in such an industry because it is really hard to do what we do. It's very much an uphill battle. And so having the support network and the community of people that are so passionate and so driven to make change is really fun.
has there been a moment recently where you changed your mind about something fundamental to your strategy or science?
Hmm. Science wise, harder to speak to for me, but I think strategically, one thing we've been playing a lot with is who is our consumer, and why will they be choosing what they're choosing? Why would they try our product? Why would they try it again afterward and stay loyal? And basically, what we're seeing is a lot of people are really curious about the concept of naturalness. And I thought that was a really interesting term. And I dove into it a bit because, of course, my familiarity with this space makes it difficult for me to stay unbiased, right? Because I know that cell replication is the most natural process in the world. It's happening every single moment in everything that's alive. So it is basically just growth at its most basic form. So I think, again, going back to our earlier conversation, naturalness, connection to food, where does it come from, curiosity about nutrition, I think that moment for me was very much about, oh, okay, this is less about concrete information and what's true. This is much more about perception and how to
Mm.
make people feel comfortable with new ideas and to be authentic in showcasing that what we're making is safe, it's healthy, it's not going to hurt anybody, and it's going to be extremely beneficial in so many different ways to so many different issues. That was a good wake up call for me because it shocked me. I thought I'd heard all of the dynamics and variables in consumers' brains around meat and meat alternatives, and I was like, naturalness, how interesting. Um, so yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, sometimes for a lot of people, I guess it can be more about like feelings than about cold facts and research papers and stuff. So,
Yeah. Well, and of course, like food, if you think about how central it is to identity, culture, sexuality, I mean, it's such a part of everyday life as it should be. And I was having a conversation the other day with somebody who said, "Isn't this like, wouldn't you rather just be in insurance or like something that's straightforward, the straight narrow path?" And I was like, I feel like you can do a lot with somebody who hates something and a lot with somebody who loves something, and you can do nothing with somebody who is indifferent.
mm,
So I would rather work in an industry where you have a lot of both sides and nothing in the middle because I truly have never had a conversation with someone about meat, or specifically alternative proteins, and even more specifically cultivated meat, where they're not of a strong opinion one way or the other. It's almost always like, oh, amazing, I've been waiting for this, congrats, this is awesome, or like, I would never, how dare you disrupt my eating habits. So I feel quite lucky, and I thought that conversation was interesting because they were like, you're nuts. And I was like, yeah, it's not right. It's not for everybody. It's certainly not easy, but it's so rewarding and entertaining at the very least. I'm never bored. So
Yeah,
that's good.
much more interesting than insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
In 10 years, what would a successful cultivated meat ecosystem look like?
Oh gosh, I love this question. Okay, I think, like we were talking about earlier, when you look at a meat aisle in a grocery store, you have everything from beef tallow to anchovies to chicken liver, like so many different options for a very diverse consumer base, right? Everybody's walking that aisle. So I want that aisle to be full of alternatives of all different kinds: traditional meat, cultivated meat, precision fermentation products on their own, mycelium. I want the whole spectrum of food innovation to be there to allow choice. And I think in 10 years, my hope is that we've all had that cost down, scale up, and commercial launch that we're all striving towards every day. But I think, in a nutshell, diversity of choice is what I would consider a successful alternatives market. And I would love to see our product mixed in with all sorts of different things. We've played with sauce, we've played with pastries, if you can believe it. We've played with, I mean, every form of meat you could think of, and it's just, there's so much we can do with it. So I think, not limiting ourselves to the traditional idea of meat, and exploring, like, could we do a Wagyu beef potato chip, like a truffle potato chip? Could we do a marbled steak? Could we do, I mean, I just want to have a team of 14 at least, product developers doing crazy stuff, and have the ability to really experiment. I think sky's the limit, honestly. So we're excited to get partnerships with more chefs, and get into their kitchens and kind of let them run wild and see what their brains do. But yeah, that's what I would consider success.
What percent of meat consumption do you expect to be cultivated meat at that time?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to remember the numbers on this, but Oxford University, the economics department, put out a report on this a few years back, and they said that about 35% of the meat market could someday be cultivated. I believe the
Well,
metric was 10 years. Um, of course, that is a huge number. I would love for that to be true.
yeah.
Um, I think realistically, if we're seeing market penetration like the plant based milk space, for example, they're about 16% of the market in the US last time I checked. And Oatly was the number one selling milk, overall milk, not just plant, in Whole Foods. So I think what I'd like to see is really great household penetration to our target demographics, and a really great awareness. Like, a lot of people have tried it, they know what it is, they're figuring out if it's for them. But we are part of the conversation. That's what I want to see. And I want to see a bunch of companies thriving in their niche, because right now, I mean, like we talked about earlier, there's pork fat, there's Wagyu beef, there's bluefin tuna, there's salmon, there's quail and foie gras. I mean, you name it. Really interesting, and just incredible teams of people. So I just want it to be out there, and I want people to be able to try it, and see how incredible it is, because it is just the most wild thing to be able to grow meat without growing the entire animal. It's just
Yeah,
very
crazy.
futuristic.
If Ivy Farm failed in 5 years, what would be the most likely reason why? A sad question.
Oh, knock on wood, knock on wood. Um, yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately and fortunately, the regulatory process does take a really long time. I think it's wonderful because we've talked a lot about progression, adaptation, evolution. I think it's essential for there to be a very rigorous process for food safety and for nutritional viability for any product going on the market. The novel foods process makes it so a lot of meat products that are on the market right now wouldn't pass it. And I think for us, we're thrilled that there's so much rigor. The flip side of that is it's taking a fairly long time to build the system out, right? So the threat is, will funding dry up before we're able to get to market and support ourselves, right? Like that's what most companies are facing right now is, can we be quite lean, spend just enough to really innovate and progress and survive until we're able to go to market? That would probably be it, like regulatory approval not coming through in time.
Do you think there's anything to worry about regarding the processed nature of this? I think you mentioned like UPF hysteria. In particular, there's been a lot of discourse around ultra processed foods. And the thing is, we don't really know which exact aspect or aspects of the processing causes them to be so unhealthy and to
Yeah.
have all of these negative health effects. So, couldn't it be in theory that like one of those deleterious things is present during the cultivated meat process?
So for us, I think for those of you who know the levels of ultra processed, we sit at a processed ingredient right now. So not ultra processed.
Mm.
While our system of creation is a process, our product itself really isn't. Depending on what you mix it with, it gets a little interesting, but processed foods negatively impact you for the most part because they are so stripped of their original state. So if you take a stalk of wheat and a piece of white bread, that white bread has been pummeled, bleached. I mean, like you name it. Let's say it like a Twinkie, right? Like that doesn't look like anything in nature. And so your body doesn't know what to do because it's not a real food, and it's made to hack your dopamine response and your craving response and your hunger and blah 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 blah. I mean, I won't get too into it, but it's basically like what social media is to the brain, the Twinkie is to the digestive system.
Yeah.
So when you think about cultivated meat, pure muscle, pure fat, you're going to eat that. And again, we're still doing testing, but there's no reason to believe that it will react any differently to your body than eating a burger. Because it is, I mean, it's the same, right? It's just the muscle and the fat.
Yeah.
So, personally, and again, I love the passion. I love the inquisitiveness. I love the attention to this. I think this is a conversation that we definitely need to have, and foods need to be held to account. With cultivated, again, I think the more people learn and the more people see it, they'll be like, oh, okay, I don't need to be nervous. I don't need to be worried. This isn't going to give me a huge blood sugar spike and then I'll have to take a 45-minute nap in order to continue on my day. It's really a pretty basic food. It's an incredibly intense process of R&D to get this incredible food, but most things in the world are that are worth having are hard to get. So for us, not wildly concerned about that. It's more about just education on what we're making and what the process is that will be the hurdle.
Yeah, makes sense. Do
Yeah.
you think in the future we'll look back at eating animals as barbaric, like that, and just all the suffering we put them through with the mass farming? It might be viewed with a similar kind of moral disgust that we now feel towards, I don't know, like slavery.
Really interesting question. I think the thing to bring up here is that Winston Churchill quote from 1931, where he was writing, I think the essay is called 50 Years Hence. And basically, what he writes in there is someday we're going to look back on growing the entire chicken for just I think the thigh and the chicken breast, and just think it was absolutely ridiculous that we ever did that, put animals through that, and wasted so much, right? Because if you think about the whole chicken, like we don't use the whole chicken, we don't use the whole cow. We try, but we don't need the eyelids and the tails. Like we just don't. And also, not great to put animals through the factory farming process, which is what most of the meat we eat is today. So I think that, like anything, every generation looks back on something and is like, that was a very poor choice. Like, I'm sure my children will look back and be like, you guys weren't recycling everything, or like, you didn't pay for water, or, all those things. I do think that probably many people will look back and say, I'm really glad that we figured out a way to do what we're doing more sustainably, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think that's all my questions. Thanks for coming on. It solves so many problems at once, and I'm excited to see these changes take hold.
Me too. You and me both.
Is there anything else you'd like to share? People can, I think, follow your latest updates on your website and I think on LinkedIn and TikTok as well.
Absolutely, yeah. We're quite active on LinkedIn. I'm going to start doing a lot more education on there, so if people are curious, give us a follow. But thanks so much for hosting and for giving innovations a platform. It's important.
No problem. Thanks.